Hey, welcome back. Today we're talking about one of the most unlikely success stories in business history. Three guys who couldn't pay their rent. No investors. No connections. No hotel rooms. Just an air mattress, a crazy idea, and absolutely nothing to lose. This is the story of Airbnb. And trust me, it's wilder than you think. So let's go back to 2007. San Francisco. Two roommates named Chesky and Joe Gebbia are completely broke. They can't afford their rent. They're designers with big dreams but empty bank accounts. They had both moved to San Francisco chasing the startup dream, but the dream wasn't exactly paying the bills. Rent was due. Bank accounts were nearly empty. And they were running out of options fast. And then one day, a massive design conference comes to San Francisco and every single hotel in the city is completely sold out. Tens of thousands of people flooding into the city with nowhere to stay. And that's when Joe sends Brian an email with a simple idea. What if they rented out air mattresses in their apartment to conference attendees? They'd charge $80 a night, include a homemade breakfast, and make enough to cover their rent. Brian thought it was bizarre. Renting air mattresses to strangers in your living room? That's not a business, that's desperation. But they had no other options. So they built a basic website in a single weekend, called it Airbed and Breakfast, bought 3 air mattresses, and waited. And people actually showed up. 3 strangers slept on air mattresses in their living room. They made a little money. Covered the rent. And something clicked in Brian's mind. If this worked in San Francisco, could it work everywhere? Could this be something bigger? They brought in their third co-founder, Nathan Blecharczyk, a talented programmer who could actually build the technology they needed to scale. And the 3 of them set out to turn this weird air mattress experiment into a real company. But here's where it gets hard. Really hard. Nobody wanted to fund them. They pitched to every investor in Silicon Valley. The answer was always the same. No. Who would ever stay in a stranger's home? It's weird. It's unsafe. It will never work at scale. 7 out of the first 10 investors they approached didn't even bother to respond to their emails. The ones who did respond said no immediately. One famous investor later admitted he passed on Airbnb and called it one of the single worst investment decisions of his entire career. At the time of his rejection, a small investment would have been worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But the rejections kept coming. Meeting after meeting. Pitch after pitch. No after no. Most people in their position would have given up. Accepted that maybe the investors were right. Maybe the idea really was too weird. Instead, Chesky, Gebbia, and Blecharczyk did something absolutely legendary. It was 2008, election season, Barack Obama versus John McCain. They designed and printed 2 novelty cereal boxes. Obama O's and Captain McCain's. They filled them with cheap cereal, sold them as political collectibles for $40 each, and raised $30,000 from cereal boxes just to keep the company alive. If that doesn't tell you everything about their determination and creativity under pressure, nothing will. These were not people who were going to quit. But even after the cereal stunt, growth was painfully slow. The website existed but bookings were trickling in. Listings were there but the photos were terrible. Blurry, dark, shot on bad phones and poor lighting. The apartments looked unappealing at best and completely uninviting at worst. Nobody wanted to book a place that looked like a crime scene photo. So Brian Chesky did something that no business school would ever teach you and no textbook would ever recommend. He flew to New York, rented a professional camera, and personally went door to door to every single Airbnb host in the city. He took beautiful, high-quality photos of their spaces himself. He talked to the hosts. He understood their concerns. He saw the product through the eyes of a real customer for the very first time. And within a single week, revenue in New York doubled. That one insight changed everything. The product wasn't broken. The presentation was broken. And fixing the presentation fixed the business. It sounds simple in hindsight. But nobody else saw it until Brian was literally standing inside those apartments with a camera in his hands. By 2009, they got into Y Combinator, the most prestigious startup accelerator in Silicon Valley. Paul Graham, the legendary investor and founder of Y Combinator, gave them the advice that shaped everything that followed. He told them, "Go to your users. Don't wait for them to come to you. Go to New York, meet your hosts face to face, sit in their kitchens, understand what they need, what they fear, what would make their experience better." And that's exactly what they did. Week after week, they were on the ground in New York, talking to real people, solving real problems. Growth started picking up. Then in 2009, something completely unexpected happened that accelerated everything beyond what anyone had predicted. The global financial crisis had left millions of people desperate for extra income. Jobs were disappearing. Savings were wiped out. People were looking at everything they owned and asking what could generate some cash. Suddenly, renting out a spare room wasn't just a quirky idea from San Francisco. It was a genuine financial lifeline. People needed money and Airbnb gave them a way to earn it from something they already had sitting empty. The timing was accidental. But the execution was brilliant. While other startups were struggling to survive the financial crisis, Airbnb was growing because of it. By 2011, Airbnb was operating in over 89 countries with more than 1 million nights booked. By 2012, they were booking more rooms per night than some of the largest hotel chains in the world. The hotel industry, which had laughed at them just a few years earlier, was now in full panic mode. Hilton, Marriott, and every major hotel chain started lobbying governments around the world to regulate or outright ban Airbnb. Cities started passing laws restricting short-term rentals. New York, Paris, Barcelona, Amsterdam, everywhere Airbnb grew, local governments pushed back. And Airbnb fought on every front simultaneously, legally, politically, and through the press. But here's what's fascinating. Even with all the regulatory battles, even with billion-dollar corporations trying to shut them down, Airbnb kept growing. Because they had something the hotels could never replicate no matter how much money they spent. Authenticity. The feeling of living like a local instead of a tourist. Staying in a Parisian apartment with a view of the Eiffel Tower instead of a generic hotel corridor. Waking up in a treehouse in Costa Rica. Sleeping in a castle in Scotland. Cooking breakfast in a farmhouse in Tuscany. No hotel chain in the world could offer that. And no amount of lobbying could make people stop wanting it. Then 2020 hit. And Airbnb faced the biggest crisis in its entire history. COVID-19 shut down global travel almost overnight. Bookings collapsed by 80% in a matter of weeks. The company that had been valued at $31 billion was suddenly fighting for survival. They had to make brutal decisions fast. They laid off 25% of their workforce. Nearly 2,000 people lost their jobs. Brian Chesky wrote a personal letter to every single employee that was laid off. It became one of the most widely shared and praised pieces of corporate communication in recent memory. He was honest about what had happened, direct about why the decisions were made, and deeply human about how painful it was. He didn't hide behind corporate language. He told the truth even when it was the hardest thing to do. And then something remarkable happened. Instead of collapsing completely, Airbnb adapted faster than anyone expected. They leaned hard into longer-term stays. People working remotely suddenly realized they could work from literally anywhere in the world. Why sit in your apartment when you could work from a cabin in the mountains of Colorado or a villa overlooking the sea in Portugal? Airbnb was perfectly positioned to serve this new reality in a way that no hotel could match. By the end of 2020, on the worst year for travel in modern history, Airbnb went public on the stock market. Their IPO valued the company at over $75 billion. In a year when airlines were going bankrupt and hotels were shutting down permanently, Airbnb went public and became one of the most valuable hospitality companies ever created. From Air Mattresses and Obama's cereal boxes to $75 billion. So what can we actually take from this story? First, solve a real problem that you personally experience. Chesky and Gebbia didn't sit in a room and try to invent a business. They had a problem, they couldn't pay rent, and they solved it in the most direct way imaginable. The best businesses in history often start exactly like this. Second, talk to your customers obsessively and in person. Flying to New York to personally photograph listings was not scalable. It made no financial sense. But it taught them everything about what their product needed to become. That hands-on obsession in the early days is what separated Airbnb from every single competitor who tried to copy them from a distance. Third, timing creates opportunity but execution creates success. The financial crisis opened a door. But that door was open for everyone. Airbnb walked through it because they were already there, already building, already obsessing over every detail of the user experience. And fourth, resilience is not a personality trait. It's a decision you make every single day. They were rejected by investors over and over. They sold cereal to survive. They fought billion-dollar corporations and entire city governments. They survived a global pandemic. At every stage there was a perfectly rational reason to stop. They chose not to. Airbnb's story isn't really about travel or technology or disrupting the hotel industry. It's about three people who refused to accept that their idea was too strange to work. Who kept going when every signal said stop. And that might be the most important business lesson of all. If you enjoyed this, subscribe. Every week we break down how the world's most iconic companies were built, almost lost everything, and came back stronger than ever. There are so many stories left to tell. See you in the next one.